Hey everyone, how's your day going? Whether it's been good or rough, you're not alone. So sit back, relax, and let's step into the world of mystery together. You ever have one of those days where a split-second decision changes everything? You take a different route, run into something you never expected, and suddenly you're stuck with a memory you can never erase? That's exactly what happened to my girlfriend and her friends one Sunday morning. It was a cool autumn morning in a small town in Texas. I was at church waiting for my girlfriend to arrive. She had stayed over at her friend's house the night before, and they were on their way to meet me for the first time. But instead of taking the usual route, they decided to try a shortcut. A small decision, one that changed everything. As they drove down a quiet street, barely any cars in sight, they saw something strange up ahead. 3 men, big guys, rough-looking, were dragging a homeless man out of an alleyway. At first, they weren't sure what was happening. Maybe they were trying to help him, maybe he was sick or injured. But as they got closer, they saw the truth. The man was barely standing. His clothes were ripped, blood streaked down his face, and his breathing was ragged. He wasn't resisting, he couldn't resist. The way they were holding him, he had no strength left to fight. My girlfriend, who was sitting in the passenger seat, rolled down the window and shouted, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" The men froze. Then, they all turned around, staring straight at the car. One of them, a guy with a knife tattoo on his neck, stepped forward. His face was calm, but there was something wrong about the way he smiled. "He stole from someone," the man said, his voice as cold as steel. "Just teaching him a lesson." My girlfriend's heart was pounding. She scanned the ground. There was nothing. No bags, no wallets, no scattered belongings. No woman crying or demanding justice. Nothing. That's when she saw the fear in the homeless man's eyes. Not just fear, absolute terror. She opened her mouth to say something else. But before she could, another man stepped forward from behind a pickup truck. He wasn't empty-handed. He was holding a machete. The moment felt like slow motion. Without hesitation, without a single word, he raised the blade high above his head and swung it down. The blade sank deep into the homeless man's stomach. The man gasped. A horrible, what choking sound filled the air as blood poured onto the pavement. The friend driving the car? She panicked, slammed her foot on the gas. The tires screeched, the car lurched forward, and they were gone before the second swing of the machete. Inside the car, my girlfriend and her friends were screaming, crying, shaking. They grabbed their phones, fingers fumbling as they called 911. "We just saw someone get stabbed. He's gonna die. You have to get there now." But there was a problem. In their panic, they couldn't remember exactly where they were. The streets all looked the same. Their minds were racing, and they weren't sure if the cops would get there in time. So they did something crazy. They turned around. They had to make sure the police found the right place. They had to help. But when they got back, the truck was gone. The 3 men were gone. And the homeless man? He was still there. Somehow he was still alive, clutching his stomach, blood pooling beneath him. My girlfriend was about to step out. She wanted to help, wanted to at least call an ambulance, when she saw something that made her stomach drop. A motorcycle was pulling up beside them. A man, different from the others but just as menacing, pulled off his helmet and leaned toward their car. He tapped on the window, his expression unreadable. And then, in a voice calm as ever, he said, "You should leave. This doesn't concern you." That was all it took. They sped off, too scared to stay, too horrified to do anything else. Later that morning, after the church service, some of the congregation went back to check on the scene. And when they arrived, the man was still there, slumped against a crumbling brick wall. A few kind strangers had stopped to help, wrapping whatever cloth they could find around his wounds. But when someone asked him about the attack, he didn't speak. He just shook his head over and over again, like a man who knew that if he said the wrong thing, he'd be dead before sunrise. A week later, the news reported a homeless man's body found under a highway overpass. No arrests were made. No suspects. The police never even found the truck. It was as if nothing had ever happened. But it did happen. And ever since that day, I haven't been able to stop wondering. What if my girlfriend hadn't driven by that morning? What if she hadn't yelled at them? Would that man have survived just a little longer? I keep thinking about his eyes. Not just because they were filled with pain, but because they carried something worse. Hopelessness. It's easy to turn away when we see something horrible happening. To tell ourselves that someone else will step in. Someone else will make the call. But what happens when no one does? How many people walked past that alley before my girlfriend showed up? How many people saw that man bleeding and thought, "Not my problem"? And how many times has this happened before? And no one ever knew. That's what keeps me up at night. Because in the darkest corners of our world, where no cameras watch and no one cares, monsters walk freely among us. And sometimes they don't even bother hiding. I've always been a night owl. Back when I was in college, I had this habit of waking up at 3 a.m. to study. It was the only time the house was completely silent, no distractions, no noise, just me and my books. I swore it helped me focus better. But one night, that habit might have saved my life. That night, I was exhausted. We had a big exam the next day, and I had already spent the whole evening cramming. By the time I got home, I was too tired to eat, too tired to think. I just wanted to sleep. I planned to wake up early, as usual, to study, but as I set my phone alarm, I noticed something. My battery was low. The only charger in the house was in the living room. If I charged my phone out there, I might not hear the alarm. But if I used my phone without charging it, the battery might die and I wouldn't wake up on time. So I made a small decision. Instead of setting my alarm for 3 a.m., I set it for 2 a.m. just to make sure the battery wouldn't die before it went off. Then I closed my door, crawled into bed, and fell asleep almost immediately. The next thing I knew, my alarm was ringing. I reached for my phone, still half asleep. But as I rolled over, something felt off. The air in the room was heavy, too quiet, too still. And then I saw it. My bedroom door was wide open. I sat up instantly, my heart racing. I knew without a doubt that I had closed that door before going to bed. I always closed it. I stared at the doorway, frozen, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe my mom had checked on me? Maybe she had forgotten to close it? But no, that didn't make sense. She never forgot. And then, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw something else. A shadow in the corner of my room. A person crouching there, watching me. I stopped breathing. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The mosquito net above my bed made the shadows look deeper, more distorted. But then, it moved. He moved. I was not alone in my room. I wanted to scream, but fear locked my throat. I wanted to move, but my body refused. I just sat there, gripping my blanket, staring at this thing in the corner of my room. And then, just as I reached for my phone, he stood up. My whole body froze. He had been crouching there the whole time, waiting for me to wake up. The moment I moved, he moved too. He lunged toward the door. I lunged at the same time. For a split second, we were face to face. And I saw him. He was a man I had never seen before. His skin was pale, his eyes dark and empty. His mouth twisted into a strange, almost amused smirk, like he was enjoying this. Then he did something I will never forget. He lifted a finger to his lips. Shoo! Then he turned and ran. Straight out of my room. Through the hallway. Into the kitchen. Out the front door. The moment he disappeared, I screamed. I bolted out of my room, ran to my mother's door, and pounded on it like my life depended on it. She flung it open, her face filled with panic. There was a man in my room. I choked out. He was watching me. For a second, she just stared at me. Then she grabbed her phone and called 911. We didn't go outside. We didn't chase after him. Instead, we locked ourselves in and screamed for help, hoping someone, anyone, would hear us. Thankfully, one of our neighbors had just gotten home. He heard the commotion and ran over. He woke up the other neighbors, and soon there were a few people searching the house. But when they checked, he was gone. No sign of him. No footprints. And the front door was still locked. That's what made my skin crawl. How had he gotten in? And then we found something else. In the kitchen, on the table, was my school bag. Dumped out. My books, my notes scattered everywhere. But here's the thing. I remember clearly putting my bag inside my bedroom before I went to sleep. He had gone through my things. He had been inside my room before I even woke up. The police arrived, took our statements, and searched the area. But there was nothing to find. No forced entry. No evidence. No one ever caught him. But I know what I saw. Someone was in my room that night, waiting for me to wake up. And the scariest part? What was he planning to do? What if I hadn't set my alarm an hour early? What if I had slept until 3 a.m. like usual? Would I have woken up to find him standing over my bed? Or worse, not woken up at all? I never slept properly after that. For weeks, I kept my bedroom door locked. I checked under my bed before going to sleep. I woke up at every small sound, because I knew something most people don't want to think about. We like to believe that our homes are safe, that as long as we lock our doors at night, as long as we keep our windows shut, nothing can get in. But that's not true. Sometimes they're already inside, waiting, watching, just hoping you won't wake up in time. When I was a kid, I spent summers and holidays visiting my grandparents in a quiet little town in rural Ohio. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where neighbors waved from their porches, and where stories, especially the scary ones, spread like wildfire. And there was one house everyone whispered about. At the very end of my grandparents' street, past the rows of neat houses and white picket fences, stood an abandoned mansion. It was massive, 3 stories tall, windows boarded up, the paint peeling like dead skin. But the strangest part? The stickers. The entire ground floor, from the front door to the walls and even the gate, was covered in old, faded cartoon stickers, the kind you'd see in a kindergarten classroom. Smiling animals, cheerful clowns, Disney characters. But time had warped them. The once happy faces had faded into something eerie, the colors bled together, the eyes looking hollow, almost sad. It was like the house itself had tried to stay innocent, but something inside had twisted it into something else. Something wrong. I wasn't the only one obsessed with the house. My cousins and I had been daring each other to go inside for years. Finally, one summer night, we made a plan. We had walkie-talkies, a flashlight, and an agreement. The 2 oldest cousins, both 15, would go in first. If they made it inside and nothing bad happened, they'd call us on the walkie-talkie. Then the rest of us would follow. Simple. Or so we thought. It was just past midnight when the older cousins left. The rest of us waited behind a row of bushes, the house looming in the distance. The flashlight beam disappeared as they stepped inside. 10 minutes later, the walkie-talkie crackled. "We're in. It's fine. No danger. Come fast." That was all we needed. We sprinted toward the house, trying to ignore how the stickers seemed to move in the dark, as if the eyes were following us. We reached the front door. It was slightly open, creaking just enough to send a shiver down my spine. Then, "Come upstairs. We're up here." The voice echoed from the second floor. We hesitated. The voice sounded like my cousins, but something felt off. They didn't sound excited. They didn't sound scared either. They just sounded flat. Unnatural. One of my younger cousins whispered, "That doesn't sound right." I felt it too. A sinking feeling in my stomach. Something inside me screamed, "Don't go in. Come on, guys." The voice called again, identical to the first time. No urgency, no change in tone. Like a recording. That was enough for me. I turned and ran. "Let's go," I yelled, and the others followed. We didn't stop running until we were back at my grandparents' house, our hearts pounding, our lungs burning. And then, we froze. Sitting on the couch, eating ice cream, were my 2 older cousins. They looked up at us confused. "What's wrong with you guys?" one of them asked. I couldn't breathe. We just heard you," I stammered. "At the mansion. You told us to come upstairs." They exchanged glances. "We never went," the other one said. Their mom had overheard our plan earlier that night. She had forbidden them from going and sent them to the store instead. They hadn't even taken the walkie-talkies with them. I felt the blood drain from my face. Then who was inside the house? No one had an answer, and none of us wanted one. We told our grandparents what happened. Their faces went pale. That's when they finally told us the story. Years ago, a family had lived in that house, a husband, his wife, and his elderly parents. The wife ran a small daycare out of the home, decorating it with stickers to make it fun for the kids. But then one day, they packed up to move to a bigger city. They never made it. They died in a car accident on the way out of town, and no one had lived in the house since. For the next few days, weird things kept happening to us. One of my cousin's bike brakes failed, sending him flying down the hill, cutting up his arms. Another cousin fell down the stairs hard even though she swore something pushed her. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling like someone was standing over me. That was enough for my grandmother. She took us to a priest who tied red protective strings around our wrists and prayed over us. After that, nothing weird happened again. But I still think about that night. The mansion is gone now. It was torn down a few years later, and they built a new house in its place. but every time I visit my grandparents, I pass by that spot. And I still wonder, what would have happened if we had gone upstairs? Who or what was waiting for us? And if we had listened to that voice, would we have ever come back?